The council chamber was massive beyond anything most humans could imagine. It stretched for 3 full kilometers in every direction, and the walls were made of pure crystal that caught the light from 1,000 different stars. This was the heart of galactic civilization, and it had stood for 10,000 years without interruption. Today, the chamber was filled with representatives from over 200 different species, and all of them were talking about the same thing. Earth, Ambassador. Velthar stood at the central podium and his forearms moved in broad gestures as he spoke. He was a Kryn, and his people had been part of the council since its founding. His voice carried through the translation devices that allowed all species to understand each other. "The matter is settled," he said, and his tone was final. "Humanity has refused our generous offer, and they insist on maintaining their independence. They do not understand what is best for them." The other representatives murmured among themselves, and the sound filled the enormous chamber, like waves on a beach. Most of them agreed with Velthar because that was how things had always worked. Young species were discovered, and they were brought into the council family. They accepted protectorate status, and in return they received technology and protection and guidance. It was simple, and it had worked for thousands of years. But Earth was different. Commander Jake Morrison sat high above the main floor in the observation gallery. He wore the dark blue uniform of the United Earth Space Command, and his jaw was tight as he listened to the debate below. Next to him sat Lieutenant Sophie Hayes, and she looked just as tense. They were 2 of only 3 human observers allowed to watch the council proceedings, and right now they both felt very small, and very far from home. "They are going to force it," Sophie whispered, and her voice was barely audible. "We need to warn command right now." Jake nodded but kept his eyes on the floor below. For 3 months, the council had been growing impatient with Earth. Humanity had been discovered 5 years ago, when one of their exploration ships had crossed paths with a council survey vessel. At first, the contact had been friendly and full of wonder. Earth learned it was not alone in the universe, and the council learned about this new species that had developed in isolation. But then the problem started. The council expected Earth to accept their authority, and Earth had different ideas. Humanity had spent its entire history fighting for independence and freedom, and they were not about to hand it over to a group of aliens they had just met. The council did not understand this because, in their experience, young species were always grateful for guidance. Earth was proving to be difficult. Representative Thos rose from his seat and his scales gleamed under the chamber lights. He was Valdari, and his people were known for being direct and sometimes aggressive. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order," he said, and his voice cut through the murmuring. "A small military action against one of their outer colonies. Nothing that causes permanent harm. Just enough to show them we are serious and encourage them to cooperate." The chamber fell silent, and Jake felt his blood run cold. They were actually discussing attacking human colonies, not as a last resort but as a teaching tool, as if humanity were children who needed to be disciplined. "This council recognizes the proposal," Velthar said after a moment. "We shall convene the military committee to discuss the appropriate measures. All in favor signal now." The vote was not even close. Over 3/4 of the representatives voted yes, and Jake watched in horror as Earth's fate was decided by beings who had never set foot on his home world. They were going to attack, and they expected humanity to simply surrender. Jake was already moving toward the exit, and Sophie was right behind him. They had to get word to Earth immediately. Every second counted now because they had no idea how long it would take for the council to organize their attack. But as they reached the corridor, a young ensign from the human delegation intercepted them. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Commander Morrison," the ensign said quickly. "Urgent transmission from Home Fleet. Admiral Patterson says to hold position and wait for further instructions. He says Earth is ready." Jake stopped in his tracks and stared at the ensign. Ready for what, he asked. Ready for what exactly? The ensign swallowed hard and glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. He did not say sir, but he was smiling when he gave the order. He said the council is about to learn something important about humanity. Sophie grabbed Jake's arm and her grip was tight. They knew, she breathed. Command knew this was coming and they prepared for it. Jake felt a strange mix of relief and fear wash over him. Relief because Earth was not going to be caught by surprise, and fear because he knew what this meant. If Earth fought back against the Council, then this would not be a small conflict. This would be war, and humanity would be facing the combined military might of 200 species. The odds were impossible. "What do we do now?" Sophie asked. "We wait," Jake said quietly. "We watch and we report everything we see back to command, and we pray that whatever Patterson has planned is enough." They made their way back to the human quarters, which were located in a distant part of the station. The quarters were small and plain compared to the elaborate spaces given to senior council members, but right now Jake was grateful for the privacy. He activated the secure communication system and waited for the connection to Earth. Admiral Patterson's face appeared on the screen, and the older man looked calm despite the situation. "Morrison," he said in greeting. "I assume you witnessed the vote?" "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "They are planning a military demonstration against our colonies. When will they move?" "We estimate they will launch their fleet within 48 hours, Patterson said. "They are going to send a force to the Sol system and demand our immediate surrender. When we refuse, they will attack." "Sir, with respect, what are we going to do?" Jake asked. "We cannot fight the entire council." Patterson smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We are not going to fight the entire council, Morrison. We are just going to fight the fleet they send. And we are going to destroy it so completely that they think twice before sending another one." Jake felt his mouth go dry. "Sir, our weapons technology is generations behind theirs. How can we possibly win?" "Because they have been fighting civilized wars for 10,000 years, Patterson said. "They have rules and protocols, and they fight to disable, not destroy. We do not have those limitations, Morrison. We fight to win, and we fight with everything we have." The council is about to learn that humanity does not surrender easily. The transmission ended, and Jake sat back in his chair. Around him, the station continued its normal operations, and somewhere in the council chambers, representatives were planning their demonstration of force. They thought they were dealing with a primitive species that would see their superior technology and immediately give up. They had no idea what was coming. Sophie sat down across from him, and her face was thoughtful. "Do you think we can actually win?" she asked quietly. Jake thought about Earth and about the billions of people who lived there. He thought about humanity's long history of warfare and conflict and survival against impossible odds. He thought about every time someone had underestimated humans and regretted it. "I do not know," he said honestly, "but I know this. The Council has never fought anyone like us before, and they are about to get a very unpleasant surprise. They think we are primitive and weak. They are about to learn they are wrong." Outside the window, the stars shone cold and distant, and somewhere out there, Earth was preparing for war. The galaxy was about to change forever, and no one except a few humans knew it yet. The Council would send their fleet expecting easy victory, and instead they would find something they had never encountered before. They would find humanity fighting for its home, and there was nothing more dangerous in the universe than that. Jake looked at Sophie and saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and they would make sure Earth knew everything the Council was planning. The battle was coming, and humanity would be ready. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. Admiral George Patterson stood on the bridge of the ECS Defiance and watched the tactical display with careful attention. His flagship was one of 57 Earth vessels currently hiding in the debris field of the old Luna shipyards. Every ship had powered down to minimum levels, and to any sensor scan from far away they looked like abandoned hulks. They looked like forgotten pieces of metal from humanity's early days of space exploration. That was exactly what Patterson wanted the Council to think. Commander Lisa Grant stood at her station and checked the incoming data streams. Her fingers moved quickly across the console as she monitored the enemy fleet's approach. "Sir," she said quietly, 12 capital ships and 40 escort vessels. They are entering the Sol system now, and their estimated time of arrival is 18 minutes. Patterson nodded slowly and allowed himself a small smile. The Council thought they were dealing with primitives who barely understood space travel. They had no idea that humanity's isolation from the rest of the galaxy had been a gift. While the Council spent thousands of years perfecting energy weapons and shields that could deflect plasma bolts, Earth had gone in a completely different direction. Earth had focused on kinetic weapons, and the Council had never seen anything like them. "Signal all ships," Patterson ordered. "Prepare for Operation Homecoming. Weapons hot, but maintain stealth protocols until I give the order. No one moves until I say so." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, and Patterson felt a surge of pride watching them work. Every man and woman on this ship had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well they might not survive. They knew the odds were terrible, But they also knew what would happen if they failed. Earth would lose its independence and humanity would become just another species under Council control. That was not acceptable. The view screen showed the Council fleet as it emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. The lead ship was enormous and it stretched for 3 full kilometers. It was a Dreadnought-class vessel with enough weapons to destroy a planet's surface. Behind it came wave after wave of smaller warships, and all of them had their shields already active. Their energy weapons were charging and they looked ready for battle. Lieutenant Carl Brooks turned from the communication station and his young face was tense. "Sir, they are broadcasting on all frequencies. They are demanding Earth's immediate surrender within 1 standard hour. If we do not comply, they say they will begin bombardment of our orbital installations." "Let them talk," Patterson said calmly. "How long until they reach firing range of Earth?" 13 minutes at their current speed, Sir, Brooks replied. Patterson watched the enemy fleet advance, and he could almost read their tactical thinking. They were being cautious this time and keeping their formation spread out. They had done their homework on human vessel capabilities, or at least they thought they had. What they did not know was that Earth had been hiding its true strength. The few ships the Council had encountered before were just scouts and exploratory vessels. They had never seen Earth's military at full strength. In the lead Council ship, Admiral Thoth stood at his command station and watched the human homeworld grow larger on his screens. The Valdari commander had been chosen for this mission because of his experience and his reputation for efficient operations. He expected this to be simple and quick. "Sir," his tactical officer said hesitantly, "our sensors are not detecting any active military presence. The human homeworld appears to be undefended. All we see are civilian satellites and some orbital stations." Thoth clicked his jaw in satisfaction, which was how his species showed pleasure. "Good," he said. "They have seen our strength and chosen wisdom. Maintain approach vector and prepare landing forces. We will occupy their command centers and install a provisional government. This will be over by nightfall." But something bothered the tactical officer, whose name was Kresh. He was young for his position, but he had studied human encounters carefully. "Sir, permission to speak freely." "Granted," Thoth said. "This feels wrong," Kresh said carefully. "Our intelligence reports indicated Earth had at least 40 military vessels. Where are they? Why would they leave their homeworld completely undefended?" Thoth waved a dismissive claw. "Obviously, they retreated to their outer colonies. They hope to preserve their fleet for a future resistance. We will deal with them after we secure the homeworld. Continue the advance." The Council fleet pushed deeper into the Sol system and crossed the orbital path of Earth's moon. They were now well inside the gravity well and could not make a quick jump to faster-than-light speeds from this position. They were committed to their approach, and there was no turning back without a lengthy acceleration period. On the Defiance, Admiral Patterson watched the trap close perfectly. The Council fleet had positioned themselves exactly where he needed them. They were surrounded by what they thought was empty space but was actually a killing field. Everything was ready. Now, Patterson said quietly, and his voice was calm as death. Commander Grant's fingers flew across her controls. "All ships execute Operation Homecoming. All weapons free. Fire at will." Across the debris field, 57 Earth warships powered up simultaneously, and their reactors went from cold to full combat power in seconds. But they did not move to intercept the enemy. They did not need to. Instead, they simply opened fire from their concealed positions, and the Council fleet learned about kinetic weapons the hard way. The Council had shields that could deflect energy, beams, and absorb plasma impacts. Their defensive technology had been refined over thousands of years of warfare. But those shields were designed for energy, and they had no answer for solid matter moving at incredible speeds. Earth's railguns fired tungsten rods that had been accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. When those rods hit a target, the laws of physics did all the work. The first salvo tore through the Council's escort screen like paper through air. 3 ships simply ceased to exist, and they were vaporized instantly by the kinetic impacts. The explosions were so violent that nearby vessels were damaged by the debris. Shields that were meant to disperse energy did nothing against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Chaos erupted on the Council flagship as alarm systems screamed warnings. "Multiple contacts," Kresh shouted over the noise. "Unknown weapon types approaching at extreme velocity. Shields are ineffective. Repeat, shields are ineffective." Thoth stared at his tactical display in complete shock as his carefully organized fleet began to die around him. Ship after ship vanished from the display or went dark as their power systems failed. In the first 30 seconds of combat, he lost 9 vessels. 9 ships destroyed before they even knew they were under attack. "Evasive action," he screamed. "All ships scatter formation. Return fire. Target those human vessels." But the human ships were already moving, and they were faster than anything the Council fleet had. They did not stay still long enough for the plasma cannons to get a solid lock. They darted in and out of the debris field, using it for cover, and every time they appeared, they fired another volley of those devastating kinetic rounds on the Defiance. Patterson watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. It was working exactly as planned. The Council ships were trying to adapt, but they had spent thousands of years fighting one way, and you could not change that kind of training in the middle of battle. They kept trying to use their energy weapons at long range, but Earth's ships were too fast and too maneuverable. Their weapons are more advanced than ours, Commander Grant reported as a plasma bolt splashed harmlessly against the Defiance's shields. But the power output is lower than we predicted. I think they have been fighting energy-efficient wars for so long they forgot how to build real weapons. Patterson nodded grimly. The Council had rules about warfare, and they fought to disable enemy ships, not destroy them. They fought civilized wars where everyone followed the same protocols. Earth had learned warfare in a much harder school. Humanity had spent thousands of years fighting itself, and when humans built weapons, they built them to win at any cost. "Target their command ship," Patterson ordered. "Load the heavy kinetics and prepare to fire." The Defiance's main railgun aligned, and its massive capacitors began charging. This weapon was the pride of Earth's military engineering, and it could accelerate a 2-ton projectile to 30% of light speed. At that velocity, the projectile carried more destructive energy than a nuclear warhead, but without any radiation. Firing solution locked, the weapons officer reported, and her voice was steady, despite the chaos of battle around them. "Fire," Patterson said. The railgun discharged with a deep vibration that resonated through the entire ship's hull, and every crew member felt it in their bones. The tungsten penetrator left the barrel and crossed 200,000 kilometers of space in just over 3 seconds. The Council flagship's shields tried to compensate, but there was nothing they could do. Shields designed for energy had no mechanism for stopping solid matter at that speed. The projectile struck the flagship's upper section and punched straight through the armor like it was tissue paper. The kinetic energy converted instantly to heat and explosive force. Secondary explosions rippled along the massive vessel's spine as power conduits ruptured and reactors began to fail. The battle had lasted only 17 minutes, but it felt like hours. The battle continued for exactly 17 minutes from start to finish, and in that short time the galaxy changed forever. Admiral Patterson watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the Council fleet tried desperately to regroup and fight back. To their credit, they adapted faster than he expected. The surviving ships began evasive maneuvers and tried to make themselves harder targets. They started firing their plasma cannons in coordinated volleys, hoping to overwhelm Earth's shields through sheer volume of fire. Commander Grant monitored the damage reports as they came in, and her face was tense with concentration. "Sir, their weapons are definitely more advanced than ours," she reported, "but the power output is surprisingly low. I think they have been fighting polite wars for so long, they forgot what real combat looks like." Patterson nodded and kept his eyes on the tactical display. The Council had refined their warfare over thousands of years, but they had done it within a framework of rules and limitations. They fought wars where both sides agreed on acceptable casualties and where surrender was always an option. They disabled ships rather than destroying them. They targeted military installations but avoided civilian populations. It was civilized and orderly, and nothing like the wars humanity had fought throughout its bloody history. "Target their command ship," Patterson ordered. "Load the heavy kinetics and give them everything we have." The Defiance's main railgun swiveled into position and the weapon's capacitors charged to full power. This was humanity's answer to the Council's advanced technology. While they had spent millennia perfecting energy weapons, Earth had focused on the simple physics of mass and velocity. A 2-ton tungsten rod, moving at 30% light speed, carried enough kinetic energy to crack a moon in half. "I'm firing." "Solution locked," the weapons officer announced. "Fire," Patterson said calmly. The railgun discharged and the entire ship shuddered from the recoil. The projectile left the barrel and crossed the distance to the Council flagship in just over 3 seconds. The enemy ship's shields tried to compensate, but they were designed for a completely different type of warfare. The tungsten rod punched through the shields like they were not even there and struck the flagship's dorsal hull. The impact was catastrophic, and the kinetic energy converted instantly into heat and explosive force. Secondary explosions rippled along the massive vessel's spine as power conduits ruptured and containment fields failed. Atmosphere vented into space in great white plumes, and the ship began to tumble out of control. On the Council flagship, Admiral Thoss found himself thrown to the deck as his ship died around him. The emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a red glow. Smoke filled the command center, and alarm sirens wailed from every direction. His tactical officer, Kresh, pulled himself up from a collapsed console, and green blood streamed down his face from a head wound. "Admiral, we must retreat." Kresh gasped, and his voice was strained with pain. "We cannot win this engagement. The humans fight like nothing we have ever encountered. They are not trying to disable our ships. They are trying to kill us all." Thoss wanted to argue and demand that his fleet press the attack, but he was a professional officer who had commanded fleets for 30 years. He knew when a battle was lost. The tactical display that still flickered on one working screen told a story of absolute massacre. Of his original 52 ships, only 19 remained combat capable. The humans had lost 3 vessels and damaged 2 others. It was not a battle. It was an execution. "Signal all ships," Thoss said, and his voice was hollow with shock. "Emergency faster than light jump. Scatter formation. Get every surviving vessel out of the system immediately." The order went out, and the surviving Council ships broke formation. They turned away from Earth and began accelerating toward escape velocity. Their drive screamed as they pushed to maximum power, trying desperately to reach the point where they could safely jump to faster than light speeds. The human fleet did not pursue them. They had made their point, and there was no need for further bloodshed. As the last Council vessel vanished in a flash of distorted space, Admiral Patterson finally allowed himself to breathe deeply. Around the bridge, his crew erupted in cheers and embraces. They had done the impossible. Earth had faced the Galactic Council's military might, and not only survived but won decisively. But Patterson did not share in their celebration because he was already thinking about what came next. The Council had expected a quick subjugation, and instead they suffered a humiliating defeat. They would report back to their government, and the Council would have to decide how to respond. Patterson knew they would not simply accept this loss. They would return, and next time they would come better prepared. "Get me a damage report," Patterson ordered, and his voice cut through the celebration. "I want to know the status of every ship in the fleet. And someone get me a direct line to Earth Command. We need to inform them that the Council knows we are serious now." Commander Grant quickly began organizing the damage assessments, while Lieutenant Brooks worked on establishing communication with Earth. As he did, a priority message came through from the human observers who were still stationed at the Council headquarters. Sir Brooks said, and his voice was urgent. "Commander Morrison reports that the Council is in emergency session. They are calling for a full military response. They want to assemble a war fleet." Patterson had expected exactly this response, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill down his spine. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Morrison estimates 3 to 4 weeks before they can assemble sufficient forces," the lieutenant replied. "He says they are calling in ships from every member species. It will be the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history." "Then we have 3 weeks to prepare," Patterson said grimly. "Helm set course for Earth. We need to get home and start planning for the next battle. This was just the opening move, and the real war is about to begin." The Defiance turned toward home and led the victorious but battered human fleet back to Earth. Behind them, in the cold vacuum of space, the debris of the Council's expeditionary force tumbled silently. Pieces of alien ships mixed with fragments of tungsten rods and spent railgun shells. It was a monument to the galaxy's first lesson about humanity, and that lesson was simple. Earth would not submit. Earth would fight. And Earth fought to win. Back at the Council station, Commander Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Sophie Hayes stood in their quarters watching the emergency broadcasts. The entire station was in chaos, and every species was demanding answers. How had a primitive species defeated a Council fleet? How had their superior technology failed so completely? What did this mean for the Council's authority over the galaxy? Jake watched the news feeds and saw fear in the eyes of the alien representatives being interviewed. They had believed for thousands of years that the Council was supreme, and that their military power was unmatched. In 17 minutes, Earth had shattered that belief completely. "We need to be careful," Sophie said quietly. "They are scared, and scared people do dangerous things. Some of them will want revenge regardless of the cost." Jake nodded in agreement. He had been monitoring the emergency council sessions, and the rhetoric was becoming increasingly hostile. Some representatives were calling for the complete destruction of Earth. They argued that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Others wanted to try diplomacy, but they were being shouted down by the voices calling for war. A message alert chimed, and Jake opened it to find orders from Admiral Patterson. The message was brief and direct. "Stay at your post and monitor the situation. Report everything you see and hear. Earth needs to know what the Council is planning. Do not take unnecessary risks, but get us the intelligence we need." Jake acknowledged the message and turned to Sophie. "We have work to do," he said. "The Council is going to come at us with everything they have, and we need to know exactly what that means. Every ship they have, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine. Patterson needs to know what he is facing." They spent the next several hours carefully monitoring communications and gathering information. The Council was indeed assembling a massive fleet, and they were pulling ships from defensive positions all across the galaxy. Every member species was being required to contribute vessels. Some were doing so willingly, but others were being coerced. The Council's unity was showing cracks. As Jake compiled his intelligence reports, he noticed something interesting. Not all the Council species were enthusiastic about this war. Some of the representatives were quietly expressing doubts. They questioned whether forcing Earth into submission was worth the cost. A few even suggested that maybe humanity should be offered real membership in the Council as equals rather than as a subjugated protectorate. One name kept appearing in these dissenting communications, and that was Ambassador Silith of the Andrian Federation. She had spoken in favor of restraint during the original debate, and now she was one of the few voices arguing for a diplomatic solution. Jake made a note to learn more about her. If Earth was going to survive the coming war, it would need allies within the Council itself. The galaxy was mobilizing for war, and Earth stood alone against 200 species. The odds were impossible, but humanity had faced impossible odds before. Admiral Patterson was right about one thing. The Council had never fought anyone like humans, and they were about to learn what happened when you threatened Earth's home. The emergency council session had been going on for 3 days without stopping, and in all of galactic history, nothing like this had ever happened before. A member species had been defeated in open combat by a species that was supposed to be primitive, by humans who the Council had considered barely capable of space travel. The implications were staggering, and every representative in the chamber understood what was at stake. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the observation gallery and watched, as the debate below grew more heated with each passing hour. Lieutenant Sophie Hayes sat beside him, and they both took careful notes on everything they witnessed. The council chamber, which was usually a place of calm deliberation, had become something closer to a war room. Voices were raised and accusations were thrown back and forth. The translation system struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations. "This is unprecedented," shouted the Valdari representative, and his scales had flushed dark with anger. "We offered them peace and protection, and they responded with violence. They destroyed our ships without mercy and killed thousands of our people. This cannot stand." They responded to a military threat, countered Ambassador Silith of the Andrian Federation. Her crystalline form caught the light as she rose to speak. "We proposed a demonstration of force against their colonies. They demonstrated superior force in defense of their home world. By our own rules of engagement, they acted within acceptable parameters." "Acceptable," roared another representative whose species Jake did not recognize. "They slaughtered a council fleet with weapons of barbaric design, kinetic projectiles, solid matter hurled through space like primitive stones. It is an insult to civilized warfare." Silith remained calm despite the hostility directed at her. "Primitive and effective are not mutually exclusive," she said quietly. "Perhaps we should ask ourselves why we never developed such weapons. Perhaps we have become too comfortable with our way of doing things." "Because we are civilized," another voice shouted from across the chamber. "We fight with precision and with rules and with honor. We do not simply try to kill everything in sight." Jake leaned toward Sophie and kept his voice low. "They are not going to let this go," he whispered. "The Council's entire authority is based on military supremacy, and we just shattered that illusion. They cannot afford to back down now." Sophie nodded in agreement. "No," she said quietly. "If they back down now, then every protectorate species in the galaxy will start questioning Council authority. They have to crush us to maintain control over everyone else." Below them, the Council speaker finally called for order, and the ancient being's form shimmered as it projected its voice across the entire chamber. "Representatives, please. We must address the practical reality of our situation. What is our response to the human situation?" Ambassador Velthar stood immediately and his forearms gestured emphatically. His species had lost the most ships in the battle and his anger was barely contained. "We assemble the Grand Fleet," he declared. "Every species contributes ships. We return to human space with overwhelming force and we end this uprising before it spreads to other systems." "You fear contagion," Sylith observed, and her voice was thoughtful. "You fear that other young species will see Earth's example and reject Council authority. Do you not fear the same thing?" Velthar challenged. "There are 24 species currently in protectorate status. If they learn that resistance is possible, then the Council's unity collapses. Everything we have built over 10,000 years falls apart." The chamber fell silent because everyone knew he was right. The Council maintained peace and order through strength, through the understanding that resistance was futile and submission was the only logical choice. Earth had just proven that understanding was wrong. If word spread that a young species could successfully defy the Council, then the entire galactic order would be threatened. "A vote," then the speaker declared. "All in favor of military action against humanity signal now." Jake watched as one by one the representatives signaled their approval. Even those who had argued for restraint ultimately voted yes. Even Sylith raised one crystalline appendage in agreement, though Jake could see the reluctance in her movements. The Council could not afford to appear weak, and so they chose war. "The motion passes," the speaker announced. "The Council fleet will be assembled within 23 standard days. All member species will contribute vessels according to their capacity. This will be the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history." Jake was already moving toward the exit and Sophie was right behind him. They needed to get this information to Earth immediately. Admiral Patterson needed to know exactly what was coming and how much time he had to prepare. But as they reached the corridor outside the chamber, a young aide intercepted them. "Commander Morrison," the aide said nervously. "Ambassador Sylith requests a private meeting with you. She says it is urgent and cannot wait." Jake exchanged a quick glance with Sophie. Sylith was one of the few who had spoken in favor of restraint, and she had seemed genuinely troubled by the vote for war. But this could also be a trap. The Council might be trying to identify which humans were intelligence operatives. Still, they had little choice. If Sylith had information that could help Earth, then they had to take the risk. "Lead the way," Jake said. They were taken through a series of corridors to a private chamber far from the main Council areas. The room was small and simply furnished with just a table and a few chairs. Ambassador Sylith waited there alone, and her crystalline form seemed dimmer than usual, as if she were tired or stressed. Commander Sylith said without any preamble, "I will be direct because time is precious. The Council is making a terrible mistake. Your species fought defensively to protect your home, but the Council sees only a threat to their authority and their power." "Why are you telling us this?" Jake asked carefully. "You voted for the war fleet." "Because I had no choice," Sylith replied, and her voice carried a note of sadness. "If I had voted against it, I would have been removed from my position and my species would have been punished. But I can still try to prevent unnecessary destruction." "What do you want from us?" Sophie asked. Sylith moved closer and her form shimmered with emotion. "I have studied your species' history," she said. "You are warriors by nature and you have fought each other for thousands of years. You have developed weapons and tactics that the Council cannot imagine. The Council thinks numbers will overcome your advantages, but I believe they are wrong." "You think we can win?" Jake asked, and he could not keep the surprise from his voice. "I think the galaxy is about to learn a very painful lesson," Sylith said. "But I also think there is a path forward that avoids mutual destruction. The Council will come with hundreds of ships. If you destroy that fleet, they will come with thousands. Eventually, they will overwhelm you through sheer numbers alone." "So what do you suggest?" Sophie asked. Win the first battle, Sylith said simply. Win it so decisively that the Council has no choice but to negotiate. Force them to accept Earth as an equal member and not as a protectorate. Some of us have long thought the Council has become too rigid and too controlling. You could be the catalyst for real change. She reached into her robes and produced a small data crystal. This contains the projected fleet compositions and the likely tactical approaches the Council will use. It also contains information about Council weapon systems and shield frequencies. Use this information wisely, Commander. Jake took the crystal and felt its weight in his palm. Why are you doing this? He asked. If you are discovered giving us this information, you will be tried for treason. Sylith's form shimmered again, and for a moment she seemed almost human in her sadness. Because I remember when my people first joined the Council, she said quietly. We were given a choice between submission and subjugation. We chose submission, and I have spent my entire life wondering if we made the right decision. Perhaps your species can show the galaxy what the alternative looks like. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, she said. The Council will send their fleet in 23 days. Use that time well. Prepare your defenses and gather your forces. When the battle comes, make it count, because you may not get a second chance. Then she was gone, and Jake and Sophie were left alone with the data crystal that might contain Earth's salvation or might be an elaborate trap. But they had no choice except to trust it. They had to get this information to Admiral Patterson immediately. Jake activated his secure communicator and waited for the connection to Earth. Admiral George Patterson stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched as 400 Council warships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. It was the largest military fleet ever assembled in recorded galactic history, and it represented 30 different species. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize a dozen worlds and turn their surfaces into molten glass. Against this armada, Earth had managed to gather 130 ships. Every available vessel had been called in from the colonies. Training ships had been pulled from the academies. Even some civilian vessels had been hastily converted and armed. It was everything humanity could muster, and by any logical calculation it was not nearly enough. Commander Lisa Grant stood at her station, and her face was pale but determined. All ships are in position, sir, she reported. The Council fleet is forming their attack formation. They are being much more cautious than last time. They learned from their mistakes, Patterson said quietly. They are staying dispersed to make it harder for our kinetic weapons to achieve multiple kills. They are not underestimating us anymore. He studied the tactical display and saw how the Council fleet was advancing in a careful spread formation. Each ship maintained distance from its neighbors so that a single railgun strike could not damage multiple vessels. Their shields were already at maximum power, and their weapons were charging. This time they were treating Earth as a serious military threat, and that made them much more dangerous. Sir Grant said hesitantly. The odds are not in our favor. Even with the intelligence from Ambassador Sylith, we are still outnumbered more than 3-1. Patterson turned to look at his crew and saw the fear in their eyes mixed with determination. The odds do not matter, he said, and his voice was firm. Either we win here today or Earth loses its independence. There is no middle ground and there is no retreat. We fight with everything we have until we win or until there is nothing left to fight with. He activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Admiral Patterson. In a few minutes, we are going to face the greatest challenge in human history. They outnumber us and they have better technology. By every logical calculation, we should lose this battle. He paused and let his words sink in. But we are not going to lose. He continued. Do you know why? Because every one of those ships out there is crewed by beings who have never fought a real war. They have been playing at combat for thousands of years with rules and protocols. When their ship gets damaged, they expect to surrender and be treated well. When things get desperate, they look for a way to negotiate. That is how galactic warfare works. His voice hardened. But that is not how we fight. We do not surrender. We do not negotiate when our home is threatened. We fight until we win or until we cannot fight anymore. Today we are going to teach the galaxy what happens when you threaten Earth. Today we show them what humanity is really capable of. All ships execute Operation Thunderstrike. Across the solar system, human vessels that had been waiting in carefully planned positions began to move. But they were not heading toward the Council fleet. Instead, they scattered in different directions, moving at maximum acceleration toward coordinates that seemed random. The Council fleet watched in confusion as the human ships appeared to retreat. On the Council flagship, Admiral Cross of the Threxian Dominion studied his tactical display with suspicion. He was a veteran commander who had been chosen specifically for this mission because of his cautious nature. "Sir, the human fleet is scattering," he said to his tactical officer. "They are not engaging. Are they running?" The tactical officer checked his sensors carefully. "I do not believe so, sir. Their vectors are too organized. This appears to be a planned maneuver." Cross felt a chill run down his spine. The last Council fleet had walked into a trap and been slaughtered. He was not going to make the same mistake. "Slow our advance," he ordered. "Deploy scouts and scan for hidden threats. I want to know what the humans are planning before we commit." But even as he gave the order, the nature of humanity's trap became clear. The scattered human ships were not running at all. They were taking up positions around massive structures that had been quietly deployed throughout the solar system over the past 3 weeks. Structures that the Council's long-range sensors had dismissed as mining equipment or civilian installations. They were railgun platforms, and there were hundreds of them. Each platform was the size of a small moon and contained capacitors powerful enough to provide electricity for an entire city. Unlike ship-mounted weapons, these platforms had been building their charge for weeks. They held enough stored energy to fire projectiles at speeds that would make the previous battle look gentle. "All platforms," Patterson ordered. "Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, fire." The platforms discharged simultaneously, and 2,000 tungsten rods, each one weighing 5 tons, were accelerated to 40% of light speed. They crossed the solar system in a coordinated strike pattern that had taken Earth's best tactical minds 3 weeks to calculate. Every angle had been considered. Every possible evasion path had been predicted. The Council fleet had nowhere to go. The kinetic rounds struck home with devastating effect, and at those velocities, each impact released energy equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. The Council fleet had spread out to avoid concentrated fire, but that meant their shields were not overlapping. Each ship had to face the onslaught alone, and their shields had been designed for energy weapons. Against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds, the shields failed catastrophically. Ships exploded or were cut cleanly in half. Some simply ceased to exist as the kinetic energy vaporized them completely. In the first 10 seconds of combat, the Council fleet lost over 100 ships, 100 vessels destroyed before they could even begin to respond. On the Council flagship, alarms screamed, and Cross watched in horror as his fleet died. "Evasive action," he shouted. "All ships scatter. Return fire on those platforms." But the platforms were too far away and too well protected by Earth's defending ships. The Council fleet tried to close the distance, but every time they moved, the human ships intercepted them. Every time they tried to form up for a coordinated attack, another wave of kinetic rounds tore through their formation. The battle lasted 3 hours, and it was brutal beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The railgun platforms fired 3 times in total, and each time they devastated the Council formations. Human ships darted in and out using their superior speed to launch hit-and-run attacks. They never stayed still long enough for the Council's plasma weapons to track them effectively. Commander Jake Morrison watched the battle from the Council station, where every representative sat in shocked silence. The tactical displays showed the carnage in real time, and it was clear that Earth was winning. Of the 400 ships the Council had sent, less than 80 remained combat capable. Earth had lost 26 vessels, which was painful for their smaller fleet, but nothing compared to the Council's losses. Admiral Cross knew when a battle was lost. He had spent 40 years in command, and he understood military reality. "Signal all ships," he said, and his voice was hollow. "Full retreat. Get every surviving vessel out of this system immediately." The Council ships turned and fled, accelerating desperately toward escape velocity. The human fleet did not pursue because there was no need. The point had been made. Earth had faced the galaxy's mightiest fleet and broken it completely. As the last Council vessel vanished, Admiral Patterson allowed himself to breathe. Around him, his crew was silent because they all understood the magnitude of what had just happened. They had won, but the cost had been high and the future was uncertain. 6 hours later, a single unarmed Council vessel approached Earth under a flag of truce. Ambassador Silith's crystalline form appeared on the view screen, and her expression was somber. "Admiral Patterson," she said, "the Council wishes to negotiate. You have proven that humanity cannot be conquered by force. We would like to discuss an alternative arrangement. Patterson studied the alien ambassador carefully. What kind of arrangement, he asked. Full membership in the Galactic Council, Syleth replied. With all the rights and responsibilities of a sovereign species. No protectorate status. No military oversight. Earth would be recognized as an independent power with equal standing. And in exchange, Patterson asked, though he already knew the answer. You stop destroying our fleets, Syleth said bluntly. Admiral, in 2 battles, humanity has eliminated over 400 Council vessels. The galaxy is terrified of you. They need to know that Earth can be a partner, and not just a threat. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. I will need to consult with our government, he said finally. But Ambassador, understand that we did not want this war. We only wanted to be left alone to develop on our own terms, I know, Syleth said, and now you have earned that right through strength. But I must warn you that there are still voices in the Council calling for your complete destruction. They believe humanity is too dangerous to be allowed to exist. This offer may not stand forever. The transmission ended and Patterson stood alone with his thoughts. Earth had won its independence through force and had shown the galaxy that humanity would fight for its freedom. But now came the harder task of building a peace. The galaxy had learned that Earth would not submit. Now humanity would have to learn how to live among the stars without burning everything down. Patterson opened a channel to Earth's government. This is Admiral Patterson. We need to make some very important decisions about our future.